Hello, my name's Arthur, and today I'm going to tell you the story about why my name is Arthur. So this is, of course, only an interesting story because I'm transgender, so I got to pick the name for myself. Um, I thought about transition for many years before I ultimately bit the bullet. When I first thought about it, I thought that I was going to go by the name my parents would have given me if I was born male, which is Lincoln. And I think Lincoln is a cool name to be born as, but kind of an insane name to give yourself. No shade if you did name yourself Lincoln, but it just, to me, announcing that I had given myself the name of a former president just felt like such big dick energy, and that's just not not my spirit. And so, several years later, when I realized I was actually going to transition, I decided to start from scratch. And so I made a list of names that were age appropriate, ethnically appropriate, common, and that I didn't know anyone with that name already. And so the last factor really constrained my list to only a handful of names. So in addition to Arthur, I seriously considered Seth, John, and Theodore. And all those names now don't really make a whole lot of sense to me, and I'm incredibly glad I picked Arthur. My primary association with Arthur is Arthur the Aardvark. So I think of Arthur as like a very nerdy name, a like wholesome name, and that's my vibe, you know. Um, and so I think it makes a lot of sense for me. And so then, how I got my middle name is another story. So when I changed my name in my like school systems to Arthur, for some reason it would pop up as Arthur R last name because my birth middle name was started with an R. Um, and so I got really used to seeing Arthur R last name, and so I told my parents that I wanted them to pick a middle name for me, but that it could be anything. It just had to start with an R. And so my parents were very accepting of my transition, and I just wanted to allow them in, if symbolically, to my transition. In part because I had rejected not one but two of their names for me, like both my birth name and the name they would have given me if I was born male. So it felt like the least I could do is let them pick a middle name for me. Not that I was obligated to, but just I wanted to. And I think Rockwell, which is the middle name they gave me, and on my channel name, is just the best middle name ever. They blew me away with it, and the coolest part to me is that my mom is very artsy and very hip, and so I immediately assumed that she picked the name. But I learned later that it was my dad who picked the name, and that he had seen Rockwell on a list of baby boy names, and knew that my mom had an artist that she really liked named Rockwell Kent. And so he both thought the name suited me and that it also, reflected something that my mom cared about. And so that was why he proposed it. My mom immediately latched upon it. And so I just think it's so cool that both my parents were involved in that. And so it like feels very special to me. And now it's all legal on my driver's ID. I like love to see it there. Um, yeah, so I think that's something to consider if your parents are accepting of your transition, or if they're en route to becoming accepting of your transition. Is keep that in mind as an option, because I think sometimes, even especially if your parents are a little bit uncomfortable, but like maybe about to become tolerant, that allowing them part of this process can make them feel more connected to it and kind of understand what's going on. Uh, and this is like the least invasive part of the process because at the end of the day, your middle name almost never comes up in daily life. So if they pick something crazy, whatever, you have a crazy middle name, which I sort of do. Rockwell's a little bit crazy, but I love it. Yeah, and so one more sort of comment is like, it took me a while to get used to Arthur as my name. There was a chunk of time where I felt like simultaneously Arthur and my birth name, and before that there was some time where I didn't even feel like Arthur at all. I just felt aspirationally Arthur, um, and it was only recently that I felt fully Arthur, not even really connected to my birth name at all. And the way I knew that was that one of my friends was telling me about a crush she had, whose name was my birth name, and it just sounded like she was telling me about any other crush. I'm just so cemented in being Arthur that it was like whatever. But if it takes you some time to get to there at that point, like that's normal. You spent like decades being called your birth name, so it only makes sense that it would take you a little bit of time to get used to this totally new name. So cut yourself some slack. And then one piece of advice that I didn't take myself, I learned about this after I picked Arthur, but I hadn't seen any other trans guy talk about, is a way that you can learn more about the name you're considering, which is if you go to wolframalpha.com, and I will link this in the description box, and type in given name, colon, and whatever name you're thinking of, You can learn the demographics, the age breakdown, the popularity of your name. So this is really cool because you know, some people care about avoiding names that are like trans specific. And I've talked to my cisgender friends. There's no such thing. Like, no one outside of the community is aware of these trans names. But there are trans people who, like, even if it's like not a thing that's going to impact whether you can pass or not, might want to avoid the names. And typically, the names that we associate as being trans names are names that are like current young baby names, but given to like adult men. And that's because, as trans guys, we're picking our names in our 20s and we want to pick a name that sounds cool. And the names that sound cool to us these days are the ones being given to like babies presently. And so if you type in given name colon your name and then see that the average age is 2, like say like Kai, I think is like 2, then you might think, oh, that's totally fine, but the name will read young. Or alternatively, if you type in given name colon Arthur, you'll learn that the average Arthur is 71 years old. So I didn't really pick an age appropriate name either, and it worked out totally fine for me. But it's nevertheless a kind of fun stat to know. Because I think I knew Arthur was old, but I didn't know it was that old. Um, yeah, so I hope that is an interesting tidbit.